The Photography Explained podcast is supported by rickmcavoyphotography.com/courses. More at the end. What are the rules of composition and which do I use? The rules of composition are not rules. The rules of composition are guidelines, ideas, things that we can use to help us. But you need to know what the rules of composition are, so you need to know which rules you're going to use, if any. Now, you don't have to use all the rules of composition, and you'll never use all of them, and certainly not in one photo, which I will explain. But you probably find that when you're taking photos, you're already following some of these anyway, because they cover pretty much everything. So find the ones that work for you, and they can help you get better compositions. These are tried and tested over time, and they work. It's just knowing which ones work for you is the hard bit. And if we get better compositions, what does that give us, dear listener? It gives us better photos. What is not to love? Yes, in this episode, I'll tell you more about the rules of composition, list all the ones I can find, and then I'm going to tell you which ones I use and why. How utterly splendid. Hi, and a very warm welcome to episode 202 of the Photography Explained podcast. I'm your host, Rick, and in each episode, I will try to explain one photographic thing to you in plain English in less than 27 minutes-ish without the irrelevant details. Yes, really. I'm a professionally qualified photographer based in England with a lifetime of photographic experience, which I share with you, dear listener, in my splendid podcast. Okay, I want to start off with a quick recap. What is composition? Simple. Composition is what you include in a photo and what you do not include in a photo. The subject matter, the other things in the composition, and how they relate to each other. And of course, what the light is doing. And from the last episode, what are the fundamentals of composition, in my opinion? The fundamentals for me are subject matter, the other elements, and light. And that's it. That is a composition to me. Let's keep it simple where we can. Right, let's look at these rules. So, first things first, are these rules of composition actual rules? No, they're not. These are not rules to be followed. These are ideas, thoughts, guidelines, principles. Call them what you want, but they're not rules. You don't have to follow them. See, I hate the term rules, and I'm the kind of person who, if I'm told there are rules, will start from the viewpoint, you're not telling me what to do. I'll do my own thing, thank you very much. So don't see them as rules. Don't see them as things that you have to do, things you're being told to do. Use them as things that can help us to take better photos, which is what I'm all about after all. Okay, so what are the rules of composition? Well, this is the list I found, and I'm just going to read them out. I'm not going to lie to you. There's no more to it than that. It's a big list. Bear with. And I'm not going to do the numbers either. I'll start with number 1, add human interest. I'm not going to do 2, 3, 4. So, add human interest, background context, balance, black and white, break the pattern, centered composition, colour theory, colour combinations, complementary elements, contrasting colours, cropping, depth of field, diagonals and triangles, don't cut off limbs, open brackets, but the top of the head can be fine, close brackets, fill the frame, foreground interest and depth, or as I've written it, foreground internet and depth, framing, golden ratio, golden spiral, golden triangle, golden wonder, no just kidding, high or low, juxtaposition, leading lines, left to right, let the eye wander, minimalism, negative space, patterns, reduce clutter, reflections, repeat elements, rule of odds, never heard of that one, never used it as far as I know, rule of space, rule of thirds, scale and hierarchy, shoot from below, shoot from above, simplicity, space to move, symmetry, textures, the decisive moment, viewpoint. Yes, really. These are all things that are found in lists of the rules of composition. They really are. And yes, there are 43 of them in total. Now, Now that's the biggest list of rules of composition that I've seen, then this is the first problem that we get, isn't it? If there's 43 rules, or things, whatever you want to call them, what possible chance do we stand of using them? I mean, you could add these to a list and have them on your phone for reference, couldn't you? But do we want to go through 43 things before we take a photo? Nope, of course we don't. But don't worry, dear listener, the list of 43 sounds much worse than the reality of these things, so don't worry. I'm not going to explain to you what they all are. You know what they are now, so you can find out what they mean and if they can help you with your compositions. And of course, if you've got any specific questions, just get in touch with me and I will gladly help you, dear listener. So what rules of composition do I use? Let's stick to what I do. Yes, why not, Rick? Right, the rule of thirds. This is my go-to rule. Sorry, I hate the term rule. It's so misleading, but I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to be good and compliant. Yes, I use the rule of thirds a lot. Well, all the time, actually. And I've got to start by explaining in words what the rule of thirds actually is. And it's a very visual thing, of course it is. So it's not the easiest thing to describe in words. So this is what I want you to do. Look at a photo or look through your viewfinder. Now imagine two horizontal lines, the lower line 1/3 up from the bottom, the upper line 2/3 up from the bottom. Next, imagine two vertical lines, the first one 1/3 from the left-hand edge and the second one 2/3 from the left-hand edge. And that's the best I can describe it. So now you've got 4 lines dividing the frame into 9 areas with 4 intersecting points. That's it. That is the grid for the rule of thirds, and it's a lot more common than you might think. It really is. And yes, it is that simple. Now, if you're not clear what I'm talking about, check out the episode page on the Photography Explained podcast website. Quick plug there, photographyexplainedpodcast.com, and you'll find a photo that I've marked up to show what I'm talking about. So that's all we have. We've got 4 lines, we've got 4 intersecting points, and these are what I use to help me to create compositions. And if you use this rule and only this rule, you will hopefully see improvements on your compositions. And it's not an exact science. You don't have to be bang on. You don't have to be exactly on an intersection point. You don't have to be exactly on a horizontal line. But be there or thereabouts, or it just doesn't work. So don't worry about being too precise, but use the lines and the points to help place things. Use the principles of where these things are. Don't worry about precision. It's not that important. These 4 lines and intersecting points, they're incredibly powerful when it comes to composition. So how do I use the rule of thirds? Well, I use the intersecting points. I've got something I want to emphasize, because those 4 intersecting points are points the eyes are initially drawn to. And it's not always the case that we want to put the subject matter slap bang in the middle of a composition. Quite often we do, and that's fine. But quite often we don't, okay? And when I'm taking a landscape photo, I'll use the horizontal lines to place the horizon on either the lower line or the upper line. And this is going to vary with what I'm photographing and what is more interesting in the photo, as in the foreground or the background. And it also varies what I want to include in a photo. If there's loads of interest in the sky, I'm going to include more of the sky, aren't I? And if there's more interest in the foreground, or that's what I'm photographing, I'm going to include more of the foreground. It's obvious, isn't it, really? And there's one thing that this does immediately. If you use either line, you're not putting the horizon in the middle of your frame, which is basically cutting your photo in half, which is aesthetically very unpleasing. Bad composition even, and none of us want that, do we? No, we don't, Rick. And with my photos of buildings, yes, I do talk to myself sometimes. And with my photos of buildings, like my architectural photography, construction photography, real estate photography, I use the rule of thirds in a couple of ways. Firstly, I use the physical horizontal and vertical lines to help me get the building level and vertical as I set my camera up to take a photo. There's practical help that they give me. I start with the top and the bottom of the building on the two horizontal lines with the corners of the building near the intersecting points. I say near to the intersecting points as every building's different and there are different things in front and behind buildings that I need to capture. And that's my starting point. And if I need to zoom in a bit, I'm pushing the intersecting points out, but I know by how much, and I can do the same on the other photos, which helps make a cohesive set of photos, which is important to me. And it is that simple. So the 4 lines and intersecting points are the starting point for pretty much every photo I take. And here's the good news. You can hopefully add these to your camera. You can add the 3x3 grid to your LCD screen with Canon cameras for sure. Yep, the rule of thirds is so significant that Canon have included it as an option on the LCD screen, and the fact that Canon have chosen that tells us a lot about how significant and helpful this rule of thirds is. I haven't checked all camera manufacturers, I'm sorry, but I hope your camera has this feature. I'm sure that it does. Okay, let's think about this briefly. This very simple but very effective rule of composition, the rule of thirds, is built into cameras. And you can have the rule of thirds on your LCD screen every time you take a photo. How utterly splendid and how utterly significant this is. A question that arose writing this: isn't this boring? Doesn't this make every photo look the same? Now, you might think that, and if you don't like the sound of these restrictions, I completely get it, and that's up to you. But remember this: if you're serious about your photography, you should be looking for a degree of consistency with your photos. Your endpoint should be that someone looks at a photo you've taken and they know that you've taken it because your look and style are so distinctive. Now, I've not got to that point, far from it, I wish. But my photos, they do have a look and a feel of their own. Just check out my website, rickmcavoyphotography.com, plug number 2, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Yeah, these 4 lines and 4 points, they work and they give compositions that are pleasing to the eye. The intersecting points give natural, visually pleasing locations for points of interest in a photo. And they help me to get compositions technically correct in camera. Quick word on that, getting it right in camera. If something helps me get a composition correct in camera, I'm all for it. And photographing buildings, it's a technical exercise, isn't it? And those guidelines on the LCD screen, they genuinely help me to get things right. Now, I refine this with the horizontal level built into the camera, but the grid helps me get the composition right in the first place. So get as much right as you can in camera, rather than relying on fixing it in Photoshop, which should be avoided and is a term that I hate between us. Okay, I'm going to stop banging on about the rule of thirds and move on. What other rules or guidelines do I use? See, I hate the term so much, I have to say something else, don't I? I was going to go through all of these, but I'm just going to mention them here. I don't have the time to go through them all, and I've got other things I need to say. So these are the other rules that I use all the time. Depth of field, diagonals and triangles, foreground interest and depth, high or low, different viewpoints, leading lines, reducing clutter, scale and hierarchy, simplicity and minimalism, and let's not forget, of course, my one photo rule, my splendid one photo rule. If you want to know more about that, get in touch or check out the previous episodes of my splendid podcast. Yes, dear listener, try to get the best one photo that you can. And my one photo rule can help you with that, and the rule of thirds can help you with this as well. Right then, we're at that point. Here are some things that you can do. I introduced this last episode and I absolutely love it. This is what I want you to do. I want you to check out the rule of thirds, and I want you to see if you can add a 3x3 grid to your camera screen. And even better, if you can add it to your electronic viewfinder, even better. I don't have one on my Canon 6D, so I know I can't do that. And try to use the 4 lines and the 4 intersecting points, and let me know how you get on. I'd love to hear from you and see if it's helping you take better photos. Right, moving on. What if I use a phone to take photos? Well, guess what? I've got an iPhone, and the rule of thirds grid, it's right there in the default camera app. So not only Canon, but Apple agree that this is incredibly useful, this rule of thirds, and that they have added it to their default camera app. It's there all the time. So if you didn't know what those lines were, now you do, and you can use them. How splendid. Right, what do? I use the rule of thirds as a starting point for pretty much every photo I take. I use the principle of the rule of thirds to help me to get the best compositions that I can. Sure, I might vary slightly from the preciseness of the 4 lines and points, but these will be the starting point for every photo. I use these lines and points to place a building in a composition, and for my landscape photos, I use these lines and points to place the horizon and points of interest in a photo. And I also use the rule of thirds for thumbnails for videos on my YouTube channel. Yes, this rule of thirds, it's everywhere. It's in a lot more places than I have actually thought about, and I completely love it. And it works, and it's dead helpful, and of course, it's free. So that's what I do. Right, some thoughts from the last episode. I know I'm repeating myself here, but composition is the most important thing in photography. End of. And your composition is all someone else sees and indeed cares about when they're looking at your photo. If your composition's rubbish, everything else is rubbish. That's the end of it. And this is the thought from the last episode, which I absolutely love, so I'm going to repeat this one as well. Bear with, please. At the moment you're taking a photo, no one else is taking the same photo in the same way with the same settings as you. The photo you're taking is unique. Love that. Next episode, how focal length affects composition. Nice and simple and specific. I like that. Right, a quick plug for me and what I do. Well, why not? If I can't plug myself on my podcast, or where can I? You've found my podcast, of course you have, because you're listening to this, so why not check out the podcast website, photographyexplainedpodcast.com. And I mentioned it earlier, check out my other photography website, rickmcavoyphotography.com. where I write blog posts about my photos of buildings and other good stuff. And on my courses page, you will find my course, How to Become a Real Estate Photographer. And you can also find me on YouTube talking about my podcast and my blog. Just type my name in and you will very quickly find me. Okay, get an email from me. If you want a weekly email from me, and why wouldn't you? Fill in the box on any of my websites, and every Friday you will read what I'm thinking about, photography related, of course. And that's enough of the self-promotion. Thank you for that. Right, ask me a question. If you've got a question you'd like me to answer, or you just want to say hi, which would be lovely, email me, sales@rickmcavoyphotography.co.uk. Shorter email address on the way. Perhaps somebody could tell me how I get a shorter email address, because I'm struggling with that one. Or visit the podcast website, and you can even text from the podcast feed. It's always lovely to hear from you, dear listeners, whatever it is you've got to say to me. Okay, this episode was brought to you by a cheese and pickle sandwich and a bag of... No Chris today. It was a cheese and pickle sandwich with very nice bread, which we paid extra for from a baker's, which was well worth it, which I consumed before settling down in my homemade acoustically cushioned recording emporium. Yes, it was very nice bread. I've been Rick McAvoy. Thanks again very much for listening to my small but perfectly formed podcast, it says here, and for giving me 27-ish minutes of your valuable time. Now, I reckon this episode will be about 20 minutes long after I've edited out the mistakes and other bad stuff. Okay, I am done. Thanks for listening. Take care. Stay safe. Cheers from me, Rick. My brand new course, How to Become a Real Estate Photographer, straight talking advice for beginners to get you making money quickly and build a career, is available to buy now. Find out more at rickmcavoyphotography.com/courses.